I'm Delphine, and 6 months ago I lost the most important man in my life. My father, Officer Tobias Mercer, served our community for 30 years with honor and integrity. Everyone called him Toby. He was the kind of cop who knew every kid's name in the neighborhood, who'd sit with elderly folks during break-ins just to make them feel safe again. When Dad died suddenly of a heart attack last March, my younger sister Vivienne and I thought we'd have time to grieve properly. We thought we understood his legacy. We thought we knew who he was. We were wrong about everything. Last weekend, we finally worked up the courage to clean out his garage. Dad had this old 1998 Harley-Davidson police special sitting under a tarp, a restoration project he'd been working on for retirement. He never got to finish it, never got to take that cross-country ride he'd planned. Vivienne was checking the saddlebags before we donated the bike when her fingers found something strange, a hidden compartment. Inside was an envelope with our names on it, some newspaper clippings, and a small key. The envelope was dated just 3 months before Dad died. What we found inside that envelope didn't just change our understanding of our father. It revealed a truth so devastating, so impossible to accept, that it shattered every memory we had of our childhood. It exposed a killer who had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. Someone we trusted, someone we loved. Someone who had murdered our mother and gotten away with it for 15 years. Growing up in Akron, Ohio, Vivienne and I always knew we were lucky kids. Not because we had money or lived in the fanciest neighborhood, but because we had Tobias Mercer as our dad. After our mother Isadora died in that terrible car accident when I was 17 and Vivienne was 14, Dad became everything to us. Mother, father, protector, friend. People in town would stop us at the grocery store just to tell us stories about Dad. How he'd helped their teenager who'd gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd. How he'd personally driven an elderly woman to dialysis appointments when she had no other way to get there. How he'd spend his own money buying winter coats for kids who needed them. Tobias Mercer wasn't just a police officer, he was the heart of our community. Dad raised us in the little blue house on Elmwood Avenue where we'd lived since I was 8. The house had this detached garage out back that became Dad's sanctuary after Mom died. Every Sunday after church, he'd disappear into that garage for hours. We could hear the clinking of tools, the soft hum of classic rock playing on his old radio, and occasionally him talking to himself as he worked through problems. The centerpiece of that garage was his pride and joy, a 1998 Harley-Davidson police special that the department was getting rid of. Dad bought it for practically nothing and spent 3 years slowly bringing it back to life. New chrome, rebuilt engine, fresh paint in that classic police blue and white. He'd run his hands over that bike like it was made of gold. "This old girl's going to take me across the country when I retire," he'd tell us, patting the fuel tank. "Montana, Colorado, maybe all the way to California, just me and the open road." Dad had it all planned out. He was going to retire at 55, sell the house, and spend a year riding from coast to coast. He'd show us maps with routes marked in red ink, pointing out national parks and small towns he wanted to visit. The bike represented freedom to him, a reward for 30 years of serving others. But Dad never made it to retirement. He collapsed in the station locker room last March, just 6 months before his 55th birthday. Massive heart attack, the doctors said. Gone before the paramedics could even get him to the hospital. The grief nearly destroyed us. Vivienne took a leave of absence from her graphic design job and barely left her apartment for 2 months. I threw myself into work, processing insurance claims like my life depended on it, anything to avoid thinking about the empty space Dad left behind. We avoided the house for months. Neither of us could bear to walk into that garage and see his unfinished projects, his tools still laid out exactly where he'd left them. The motorcycle sat under its blue tarp like a monument to dreams that would never be fulfilled. But last weekend, we finally decided it was time. We couldn't keep avoiding reality forever. The house needed to be cleaned out, and Dad's belongings needed to find new homes where they could do some good. "We should donate his police stuff to the academy," Vivienne suggested as we pulled into the driveway. "The rookies could learn from his case files." Walking into that garage felt like stepping back in time. Dad's coffee mug still sat on his workbench, a ring stain marking where he'd placed it that final Sunday. His reading glasses were folded neatly next to a motorcycle manual. Tools hung in perfect rows on the pegboard wall, each one in its designated spot. We started with the easy stuff, boxing up his commendations and awards, sorting through his extensive collection of police memorabilia. Dad had kept everything from his career, newspaper clippings about cases he'd solved, thank you letters from grateful families, even his first badge from when he was a rookie. "Look at this," Vivienne said, holding up a photo of Dad with his training class from 1994. "He looks so young." "He was younger than I am now when he started," I replied, taking the photo. "Can you imagine, 22 years old and already wanting to save the world?" We spent hours going through boxes, sharing memories triggered by each discovery. Dad's sense of humor came through in the silly notes he'd leave himself. His dedication showed in the meticulous case files he'd kept long after officially closing them. His love for us was evident in every photo he'd saved from our school events and graduations. By evening, we'd made good progress everywhere except with the motorcycle. Neither of us had the heart to touch it until Vivienne finally walked over and pulled off the tarp. "Dad would have loved seeing this thing finally purr again," she said, running her hand along the pristine chrome. "Remember how he'd come out here every Sunday just tinkering away," I replied. Said it helped him think through tough cases. That's when Vivienne decided to check the saddlebags one final time before we donated the bike. We wanted to make sure we hadn't missed anything important. We had no idea that what she was about to find would change everything we thought we knew about our father, our family, and the truth about how our mother really died. We sat on Dad's old workbench, the envelope between us like a loaded weapon. My hands were shaking as I carefully opened the seal, trying not to tear the paper. Dad had written our names in his precise handwriting, the same way he'd labeled our school lunch bags when we were kids. The letter was 3 pages long, written in Dad's familiar blue ink. I started reading aloud, my voice barely steady. "My dearest girls, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me before I could finish what I started. I pray you never have to see these words, but if you do, then you deserve to know the truth about your mother's death and why I couldn't let it rest." Vivienne grabbed my arm. "Keep reading." "For the past 2 years, I've been investigating a pattern that I initially dismissed as coincidence. Single mothers in our county have been dying in hit-and-run accidents at a rate far beyond statistical probability. What started as a nagging feeling became an obsession when I realized these weren't random tragedies." My voice cracked as I continued. "Your mother's death was not an accident, neither were the others. Someone has been deliberately targeting vulnerable women, and I believe I know who." Vivienne made a sound like she'd been punched. We both stared at the letter, the words blurring through my tears. "I can't write the name here in case these papers fall into the wrong hands," the letter continued. "But the evidence is in Safety Deposit Box 2847 at First National Bank downtown. The key is with this letter. What you'll find there will be difficult to accept, but it's the truth. This person has been using police resources to identify and track victims. Someone with access to domestic violence reports, someone who knows patrol schedules, someone who understands exactly how to make murder look like accident." I had to stop reading. The garage felt like it was spinning around me. "This is insane," I said, setting the letter down. "Dad was brilliant, but he was also paranoid those last few months. You remember how he started locking everything, how he'd check the windows twice before bed." "That's not paranoia if someone actually wants to hurt you," Vivienne replied quietly. I picked up the letter again, forcing myself to continue. "The hardest part isn't knowing your mother was murdered. The hardest part is knowing that the person who killed her has been in our lives all along. Someone we trusted. Someone who comforted us after she died. Someone who helped raise you girls and watched you grow up." Vivienne was crying now, really crying. "Oh my God, Delphine, he's talking about Detective Thorne, isn't he?" The thought had been forming in my mind too, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that terrified me. Raymond Thorne, who taught me to drive. who'd walked Vivienne down the aisle at her wedding rehearsal when she was practicing for her best friend's ceremony, who'd been at every birthday party, every graduation, every major moment of our lives after Mom died. The evidence will speak for itself, Dad's letter concluded. But please be careful. If I'm right about this, then confronting this person cost me my life. Don't let it cost you yours. Take everything to the FBI, not local police. Trust no one from the department until this is resolved. I love you both more than words can express. Make sure justice is served, but make sure you stay safe. Your devoted father, Tobias. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of Dad's words settling over us like a suffocating blanket. We have to go to the bank, Vivienne said finally. We should think about this first, I replied. What if Dad was wrong? What if grief and stress made him see patterns that weren't really there? Then we look at his evidence and prove he was wrong, she said. But what if he was right? What if the man who killed our mother has been pretending to care about us for 15 years? The brass key felt heavy in my palm. Such a small thing to hold such enormous consequences. If we do this, there's no going back, I warned. Whatever's in that safety deposit box will either prove Dad was losing his mind in his final months, or it'll prove that someone we love is a monster. Vivienne stood up, her decision made. Dad died trying to get justice for Mom and all those other women. The least we can do is see what he found. She was right. We owed it to Dad, to Mom, and to ourselves to know the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. 20 minutes later, we were driving toward downtown Akron, the key burning a hole in my pocket and our father's final investigation waiting to be unveiled. First National Bank felt like a tomb as we approached the safety deposit box area. The elderly clerk, Mrs. Henderson, had known our family for years and offered her condolences again as she led us to the vault. She didn't ask questions about why we were accessing a box we'd never mentioned before. Box 2847 was larger than I'd expected. When Mrs. Henderson turned both keys and lifted the metal lid, we found ourselves staring at the most organized investigation I'd ever seen. Dad had turned this safety deposit box into his private evidence room. The first folder was labeled Timeline 1995 to 2009. Inside were detailed charts showing dates, locations, and victim profiles for 8 different hit-and-run deaths. Each woman was between 25 and 35. Each was a single mother. Each had filed a domestic violence report or restraining order within 6 months of her death. He tracked all of them, Vivienne breathed, studying the timeline. This goes back nearly 15 years. The second folder contained photographs. Surveillance photos taken from a distance, showing a dark sedan parked near each accident scene. But these weren't official police photos. The angles were wrong, the quality suggested they were taken secretly. Someone had been watching these locations. My hands trembled as I opened the third folder. Vehicle analysis. Inside were detailed notes about a 2001 Ford Crown Victoria, dark blue, with specific damage patterns consistent with multiple collisions. Dad had somehow obtained paint samples, impact analysis reports, and even partial license plate information. Vivienne, look at this, I said, pointing to a handwritten note clipped to a photograph. Dad wrote, vehicle registered to R. Thorne, personal vehicle not department issued. The fourth folder destroyed what was left of our world. Financial records contained bank statements, insurance claims, and property transfers. Raymond Thorne had collected life insurance payouts on 3 of the victims by claiming to be their boyfriend or fiancé. He'd used fake relationships and forged documents to position himself as a beneficiary. The amounts were staggering, nearly $500,000 over 10 years. He was getting rich by killing them, Vivienne said, her voice hollow with disbelief. But the fifth folder was what broke us completely. Isadora Mercer case file. Our mother's entire life laid out in documents we'd never seen. Her original police report about her abusive ex-boyfriend, Marcus Brennan. Her request for a restraining order, her change of address forms when she moved in with Dad. And at the bottom, a photograph that made my blood freeze. Raymond Thorne standing next to our mother's wrecked car on the night she died, but this wasn't from the official investigation. This was taken from across the street, showing Thorne at the scene before emergency responders arrived. "He was there," I whispered. "He was there before anyone called it in." The final folder contained the most devastating evidence: personal communication. Dad had been secretly recording conversations with Thorne. We found a small digital recorder and several audio files labeled by date. With shaking hands, I pressed play on the most recent recording. Dad's voice filled the small room. "I know what you did, Ray. I know about Celeste, about Linda, about all of them, including Isadora." Thorne's response was calm, almost amused. "You can't prove anything, Toby. And even if you could, who would believe you? I've been your partner for 15 years. I helped raise your girls." "The evidence speaks for itself," Dad replied. "Evidence can disappear," Thorne said. "People can have accidents. Heart problems run in families, don't they? Stress is such a killer." The recording ended there. We found Dad's final notes, dated just 1 week before he died. He'd planned to present everything to the FBI on March 20th. He'd scheduled the meeting. He'd gathered every piece of evidence. He died on March 18th. "Thorne killed him," Vivienne said, her voice breaking. "Dad figured out that Thorne murdered Mom, and Thorne killed him to keep him quiet." I thought about Thorne at Dad's funeral, comforting us, sharing memories of their partnership. How he'd hugged us and told us Dad was like a brother to him. How he'd offered to help us with anything we needed. The man who'd killed our mother had held us while we cried at our father's grave. "We have to call the FBI," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "Right now, before Thorne realizes what we've found." As we carefully packed Dad's evidence back into the folders, I realized our father's final act wasn't investigating these murders. It was protecting us by leaving a trail we could follow safely after he was gone. Dad had solved his own murder before it happened. We called the FBI from the bank parking lot. Agent Patricia Kowalski answered our frantic call and met us at the federal building within 2 hours. When we laid out Dad's evidence across her conference table, her expression grew darker with each folder we opened. "Your father was a hell of an investigator," she said after reviewing the audio recording. "This is airtight. We can move on this immediately." The arrest happened fast, too fast for Thorne to destroy evidence or disappear. FBI agents found him at his house, grilling steaks for his wife's birthday party. According to Agent Kowalski, he actually smiled when they showed up, thinking they were there about some routine case. That smile disappeared when they read him his rights for 8 counts of first-degree murder. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of Thorne's crimes. He'd been operating for over 15 years, using police databases to identify single mothers who'd filed domestic violence reports. He'd establish fake romantic relationships with them, take out life insurance policies, then stage accidents when the policies matured. Our mother had been his most profitable victim. Thorne had convinced her to list him as the beneficiary on a policy worth $200,000, claiming it was temporary protection for us girls if anything happened to her. She'd trusted him because he was Dad's partner, because he'd been so helpful during her divorce proceedings. The medical examiner confirmed what Dad had suspected. His heart attack was actually caused by a rare plant toxin that mimics cardiac arrest symptoms. Thorne had used the same method on 2 other victims who'd grown suspicious of him. "Your father saved lives by documenting this," Agent Kowalski told us after Thorne's conviction. 3 other women were on Thorne's target list. We were able to warn them and provide protection. The trial lasted 4 months. Thorne showed no remorse, even when confronted with recordings of his own voice threatening Dad. He actually looked bored during most of the proceedings, like the whole thing was an inconvenience. But we weren't the same people who'd walked into that garage 6 months earlier. I quit my insurance job and enrolled in criminal justice classes. If Dad's investigation could save lives, then maybe I could learn to do the same. I wanted to understand how predators like Thorne operated, how they identified victims, how they could be stopped before they struck. Vivienne channeled her graphic design skills into creating awareness materials for domestic violence organizations. She developed a website called Hidden Patterns that helps law enforcement agencies identify potential serial targeting of vulnerable populations. We established the Tobias Mercer Foundation with the money recovered from Thorne's victims' insurance fraud. The foundation provides safety resources, security consultations, and emergency relocation assistance for single mothers leaving abusive relationships. But the most important change was personal. Vivienne and I realized we'd been living our lives trying to honor a memory when we should have been living to continue a mission. Dad didn't just want to be remembered as a good cop. He wanted us to keep fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. We kept one thing from his investigation: that 1998 Harley-Davidson police special. We had it restored to running condition and donated it to the Ohio State Police Museum, but not before adding our own touch. A small bronze plaque on the fuel tank reads, "Officer Tobias Mercer rode for justice, died for truth." Every year on the anniversary of Dad's death, Vivienne and I visit the museum. We sit next to that motorcycle and tell him about the cases we've helped solve, the women we've helped protect, the difference his investigation continues to make. Last month we got a letter from Sandra Portman, one of the women Dad's evidence saved from Thorne's target list. She'd remarried, had another child, and was thriving in a new city with a new life she might never have lived to see. "Your father gave me my future back," she wrote. "I get to watch my daughter grow up because of him." That's when I finally understood Dad's real message. He didn't leave us that evidence to burden us with revenge or guilt. He left it because he knew we were strong enough to carry his work forward. He trusted us to turn his death into something meaningful. Thorne will spend the rest of his life in prison, where several inmates have made it clear they don't appreciate men who hurt women and children. Justice has a way of finding balance, even behind bars. Sometimes I still go to that garage, now converted into the Foundation's office space. When I'm working late on a difficult case, I can almost hear Dad's voice encouraging me to keep digging, keep fighting, keep protecting the innocent. He taught us that real heroes don't just solve crimes. They make sure those crimes can never happen again.